record, share, instructor copy. My computer is glitching out too. All right, here we go. Here we are.
So are we starting this again at 8:30 tomorrow morning?
You bet.
Same. Oh, cool. Alrighty.
Bat time, same bat channel.
Alrighty. This time I don't gotta drive all the way out there.
So yeah, I'm glad now you know. Sorry about that. I'm guessing this is Kiefer who's talking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, with how you were thrown into the program so late, so no one was able to sort of tell you what was going on. But I appreciate you getting home so quick and logging on here. So it's good. We have a completely full class. So that's good.
All right. Well, I got a question. They don't want like us in a classroom for this whole social distance thing, but it's okay if 25 of us all cram into the shop at once?
Well, we're not going to be crammed into the shop. So I guess a lot of you, because your first years, have never seen the shop here. And traditionally, usually when we did it, we would have, like, you could have first years, second years, and third years all in the shop at the same time. We're not going to be doing like that anymore. And so we're going to be able to spread out a lot more. So that's the idea. So
Okay.
I'll be honest with you. I think if it were up to me, and I think it's fair for me to speak for Clint on this too, if it were up to us, we would put you in masks and say, come to class. Yet again, though, like I've said a few times, this even goes beyond the scope of OH&S in that this is unprecedented and higher levels of authority are dictating everything that's going on right now. So it's a little bit different, right? This is a good one for you, Clint. So employers are required to give you PPE for a respiratory hazard. And a virus is a respiratory hazard. But we're supposed to tell them they're required to bring their own masks, right?
The catch is the masks are protecting others from us. They're not for our own personal protection.
Always.
I looked into that one already.
And so, like, if you think about the silliness of that, like, so I'm wearing a mask to protect you, and you're wearing a mask to protect me, but my mask doesn't protect me, and your mask doesn't protect you. So that's how they get away with it.
That is the loophole that they're getting away with, I think.
Sly, underhanded buggers, hey? Like, oh, you can't win. You can't win. Anyhow, I didn't look into it. I just thought about it and thought that was an interesting little tidbit there. But so that's how they're getting around that, I guess. The mask doesn't protect you. It only protects everybody else.
At our shop where I work, we don't even have to wear masks at all. We did, however, lock the shop up from all drivers and whatnot getting in.
Oh man, every shop should be like that anyway, as far as I'm concerned. Most of the time, they're just a distraction to what's going on. So
yeah, they just stand around for 45 minutes talking.
Yeah, exactly. So why do we need to know this? Because for some of you, you're going to be doing climbing. Most of you will be doing lifting and rigging and hoisting procedures. So some of you will be climbing wearing fall protection, but I guarantee almost all of you will be using a crane at some point, and I can promise you you'll all be lifting something at one point in the future. So how are we going to learn this? Well, our 5 objectives in this ILM: select and use and maintain, just like what we talked about in the last one, specialized PPE for climbing, lifting, and load moving equipment. So what are the different types of PPE we can use for that? Manual lifting procedures. So something that's often overlooked. We need to make sure that all of you are lifting, because I don't want any of you to have a sore back. That's no fun at all. For any of you who do have back injuries, it's not a fun time. Describe rigging hardware and the safety factor associated with each item. So this is going to be when you start loading up and especially this next one too, select correct equipment for rigging typical loads. If you picking up small little parts around the shop usually is crucial, but once you start picking up these larger, really heavy, awkward loads, you need to be really, really sure that you're picking the correct load handling equipment. If a set of dualies rolls off of a pallet jack while you're taking a hub off, for instance, probably not the end of the world. Might roll into a door, leave a dent, could injure somebody. But if you drop an excavator off the back of a trailer, that's probably going to cause a lot more damage and grief. So you want to make sure you're picking the right rigging equipment and for different loads, especially bigger loads. And then hoisting and load moving procedures. So we're going to talk about some crane sign language for those of you who have never used any of that. Sometimes places gets loud and you're wearing hearing protection. You can't hear everybody talking. You're not going to be able to see who's yelling now because we're all going to be wearing masks. So the sign language involved with cranes are going to be very important. What is the PPE we're going to require for climbing? Well, a harness, just like that one. Just like the one I have here. Just like something like this. So, or wait, is my camera on? Can you guys see me? Okay, good.
Yeah, you're good.
Just like this. This is the nub that hooks onto your back. So this is where your safety will be. This is going to go around your front area here. I'm not going to show you how to put this on. I mean, they give you some nice fancy directions in the ILMs there, but unless you're using this kind of stuff, it's not really necessary. And that is something you certainly would take a specialized training course when it came to PPE required to fall protection. And they're gonna tell you not only how to select the proper harness, so the one that has the correct safety standards, fulfills all of those, but also how to inspect it and maintain it. So remember I said there's gonna be some times where you definitely are going to have to throw this out. For instance, if you don't have your own harness, if they're hanging along a wall and maybe they'll only get used once a week, 2 times a week, you need to inspect it every time you use it. But maybe throughout the week, everybody wheels by here with a pallet of parts and they're rubbing along here. So now there's some wear happening in an area here, then you would need to be trained properly to know when to discard it and get a new one. A couple different parts of the body harness. So a front D-ring, this is the one I showed you here, a rear D-ring. And so here is where you would have what I call your lanyard and your shock absorber. So this is what would actually, it extends. It works like a seat belt. If it catches one fall, it's garbage. This whole assembly would get thrown away and you buy a new one. So that's what a fall arrest is. They don't just catch you. There's some give way to that, some shock absorption, so that it's not such a jolt when you do get caught. That also means, so fall protection only works at certain heights. If you're only a foot off the ground, this isn't going to do anything because it's not going to extend. It's going to extend too far and you're going to hit the ground anyway. So. And here's the steps on how to put this on. Yet again, if you need to wear this thing, you probably already know how to put it on. So I'm not going to go over it with you. And if you don't need to wear it, you've never been trained on it, you don't know how. Hey, someone's drawing on my screen.
Guess somebody found that option.
Yeah. There it is. It's okay. I can erase that too. So ladders, this is probably something all of you have used at one time or another, right? You got to get up onto the back of a tractor. So you put a ladder like this over top of one on one frame rail and one leg on the other frame rail, and then you ratchet strap it down to the frame rails, right? Hopefully not. That's not what you're doing. But ladders are something very common in a shop. Step ladders, just to get up onto short little heights. And I mean, you can get these that are pretty tall, like 15 feet high step ladders pretty easily. One that'll have a ladder on both sides. This one only has a ladder on one side. I'm sure we all know we can't climb up the one side of the ladder. The extension ladders need to be correctly chosen. So you have to, OH&S, just like in everything else, it explains how ladders are correctly to be used. There is a correct amount of overhang that your ladder should have, and depending on the height you're going on. For me, what my strongest recommendation was for the workplaces I was at is if you need to go onto the top of a van trailer, the best way to do it is with a scissor lift. It's much more efficient. Now, we used to change a lot of rollover tarps. So it's essentially a van trailer with no top, but it has a tarp that rolls over the entire length of the trailer. At first, we were doing it with ladders. And so we would have 2 ladders, and you'd have to yard the tarp on your shoulder up on a ladder and then put it on the roof of the trailer. Needless to say, that was a little bit hazardous. And it actually took a lot of time. It was not easy to do. A lot of setup. Took 2 guys to do it. 2 people had to do this, and you had to have 2 certain people. So if you weren't strong enough, or if you weren't confident enough to go on the ladder with this 30-foot tarp, or one end of the 30-foot tarp on your shoulder, then you couldn't do it. And it wasn't something that I would make anybody do. But once we got a scissor lift or a man lift, it was one that had an overhang, so we could hang it over the end of the trailer. It had enough capacity that it could lift up the tarp itself, and it made an hour-long 2-person job take about 5-10 minutes for 1 person. So much easier, much safer, and essentially, if you're doing a lot of this job, saving a lot of that time, you're going to pay for that piece of equipment. And I realize equipment is expensive, but this is one of your employer's responsibilities to make sure you have the proper equipment to do the job as safe as possible. Materials. Fiberglass has become a very popular standard, and it's for its electric non-conductiveness. It is strong. Most of them are as strong or can be weighted as strong as aluminum ones. They're lightweight, but they don't conduct. And so these are mostly the standard. You'll still see a lot of aluminum ones. For our industry, we don't need to worry about electrical as much. I'll show you a few places where sometimes you do have to worry about electricity in our industry, especially with aluminum ladders. Wooden ladders, does anybody out there have a shop where you have a wooden ladder? I don't hear anything, so I really hope that no one has any wooden ladders out there anymore.
Oh, just aluminum.
Just aluminum, okay, good. I have had 1 student tell me that they had wood ladders. I would recommend replacing it if that is what you do have. So, scaffolding, does anybody use scaffolding? You guys setting up scaffolding?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
For tank inspection.
For tank inspections. Okay, makes sense, absolutely. So there's a few different kinds of scaffolding. There's gonna be a permanent type, or this type here. This is gonna be more construction. And so this is what I was looking for a bit. Are you setting this type of scaffolding up around your tanks?
The half portion of the tall section.
So like you
or
would half of this type of thing up?
The taller section, in order to get into the very back of the tank on the top.
Oh, you would put up one of these tall sections up there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And it would be
very close to the end.
Okay, and you would have all of these, like this would probably be outside then, and you have all of this set up on the scaffolding as well? Or do you
Not really.
this?
Yeah. This yeah.
Okay, so the difference is, so all of this scaffolding, this is essentially modular. You can build this as high as you want, as low as you want. You can put more sections up higher and higher, and that's where all of this terminology is going to come in. A lot of this is going to go with the different pieces that come with the modular one, where you can assemble it and disassemble it all the time. And scaffolding, setting up and taking down scaffolding has its own regulations with it. So if you're building this type of scaffolding, you've definitely gone through some specialty training. To use this type of scaffolding, it's all assembled, put together. It doesn't come apart very much. Maybe these fold away when it's being stored. So when you're not using it, you can fold these outriggers away, and then it can roll into a corner a bit better. This scaffolding, you use it inside, I'm guessing, Ali?
Yep.
Yep. So this is only inside. This is what you'd set up outside at a construction site. This is what you guys are going to use. If you use, and I shouldn't say all the time, but the large majority of you will be using something like this. You wheel it out into where you need it in the shop. You put these outriggers out, and then you can go up and down it using your fall arrest as needed. So for tank inspections, absolutely. So you're talking about doing like the VK inspections and stuff like that, right?
You bet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We had, they call it a stairway to heaven. It's just a staircase on stairs. Very similar to this. We used that when we were doing VKs and stuff like that. So then they have, I don't know if you can tell, but this is a fake picture, an obviously fake one. So this wood isn't real in here. It's drawn in after. Hopefully none of you have to set up wood scaffolding like this. I mean, most of us aren't going to be building sheds, doing other jobs. So just so you know, it does exist though. Here we go. The important stuff. This is what we really got to get into. Lifting and load moving equipment. So what do we need to consider in our hazard assessment while we're doing this? Well, the weight of the load, the size, and the shape, and the number of times we'll need to move it, and the technique used to move the load. So if your job is to move brake drums from the back of a flat deck to the scrap bin, and you have 10,000 brake drums to move, I would highly recommend that your technique isn't manually moving it to use a machine, because you're going to get tired. There's no way you're going to be able to do that job all day long. Heavily awkward loads all day, you're going to get injured. Eventually you will. And I mean, productivity too. How many hours can you haul brake drums all day long if you thought about it? Now, when you do have to pick up something manually, they need to provide you with equipment to assist lifting, lowering, carrying, pushing, pulling, and dragging. They're required to ensure you're trained in the safe operation of the equipment. So if they have skid steers, pickers, telehandlers, even pallet jacks, come-alongs, all of these things are different types of load material or load handling equipment that you need to know how to use before you can use it properly. All of these things too, like all of that equipment is going to have a daily inspection, and you're going to have to fill that inspection out before you use the equipment, or make sure it has been done already that day. You don't want to be like that gentleman who didn't know you couldn't drive a forklift when you're not in it. So you need step-by-step instructions on how to use the equipment. You don't want to have to try and figure out where the brake pedal is when you're going gung-ho to a wall already, okay? And then the basic care and maintenance, methods for loading and unloading, and what would happen if you didn't operate it correctly. Very important. So some of our material handling stuff, an outdoor forklift and an indoor forklift. it tells you what is the difference between these. Why is one an outdoor and why is one an indoor?
One is
Tires.
The tires. I heard someone say something else, but someone said the tires, and that's what it is. These solid tires are unforgiving. Neither of these forklifts have much of anything for suspension, and there's a reason for that. I'd imagine that this forklift, either of these ones, could probably go up 30 feet, maybe even higher. They probably can lift 1,000 pounds, if not maybe more, probably more. When you have this all the way extended, all the way up, the booms all the way up there with a load, and you're pulling out, you don't want this to be rocking and tilting. Then if you had a really nice loose air suspension on this, air ride, so these really shift back and forth all the time, that load way up top there is going to be swaying so far back and forth that you would risk shifting your center of gravity too far and dumping this thing over. So they already have almost no suspension travel. So now the tires become the suspension. This is the only way you don't feel every single little rock in the yard is with the pneumatic tires. For any of you who have ever taken a solid tire unit out into a gravel yard, holy crap, like keep your tongue in your mouth because otherwise you'll bite it off. It's really, really bumpy. Really.
The shop I used to work at, their tire or the forklifts they had all the tires filled with like whatever that stuff that they fill, the solid stuff they fill the tires with.
Oh yeah, so you lost any suspension absorption with that right away. Yeah. There's also other things you can use. Hey, if you gotta go get parts, get a parts trolley. Nothing wrong with that. Some of the other different things you can use. So a manual chain hoist, an electric chain hoist, they'll lift things up nice and easily. Does anybody not have an overhead crane or any kind of crane?
All we have is a manual hoist.
Manual hoist? At least it's something. Do you have pits at your shop?
No.
No pits?
I have a pit and a 5-ton crane.
That's the best combination I found, to have a pit and a crane.
It's pretty nice.
So I talked about that there is one important thing when it came to electricity. So a lot of times when you're worried about ladders with electricity, you're worried about overhead power lines, right? Those typically aren't in the shop unless we have an overhead crane. So what we have, they are right here, along here. Can everyone see these bars? There's 3 of them. And this picture isn't color. I wish it was, but it is not. Do you guys see my notifications when they come up too? Like, did you just see the email I got?
Nope.
Email?
No.
No? Okay.
Nope.
I never know what it shows or what it doesn't show yet. I'm still getting used to all this. So anyhow, regardless, those 3 bars there, those are what conduct the electricity. So right here, this piece here is like a slider. And these little contacts here slide along these bars, and that's how this gets energy. That's how this gets electricity. So that's how, through here is how this all gets juice. Now, if you go up here and lean your ladder up against these bars, you're gonna have a very bad day. For any of you who've seen them, or if you've never seen them, next time you go to a place where it has an overhead crane, or we can sort of take a look at, we don't have an example of this in our shop. Our shop, it's all the wiring's contained, but any large gantry cranes like this will have those exposed bars. You have to be very, very, very careful. They're usually like 2 inches thick by like a 1/4 inch thick of copper. And if you didn't know what they were, there's no warning on them or anything. If you happen to be up next there, even in a like a telehandler or something, and you put your hand on there, you would be dead. It's 3-phase power. It will kill you very fast, very, very, very fast. So that is my big warning for cranes and overhead power lines in the shop. So aluminum ladder, leaning that up against there, you'd know right away that you're having a bad day because there'd be lots of sparks flying and everything. So just keep that in mind. When it comes to overhead cranes, yet again though, if you have a type of crane or any type of crane in the shop, you're going to have training on it, and they will certainly talk about those exposed power bars.
They didn't talk about the exposed power bars for us.
Really? Weird.
Well, ours were mainly sealed in, like so the cables were running through tubes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. And that's similar to what we have in our shop here. So they might just not have mentioned it because you don't have one that had that, or it was a bit different. Like I worked at a place that had essentially this identical setup. Like if this was a color picture, though, you'd see those bars are copper, like they're bright and shiny because this scrubs them clean all the time. It's constantly wiping them down. And you could see that they're copper, and they definitely had to be careful of them. So
Ours were orange and green.
nice. At least the color that you can see. So
Yeah.
Last big shop that I worked at, you couldn't see them, but mind you, the shop is like 80 feet tall or 100 feet tall or whatever it is.
oh yeah. So even at that shop, your chances of getting up there for whatever reason, pretty slim. Yeah. I was at some places where when you stand on the top of a tank, you would be at eye level with those bars. So it would be very easy if you trip or something to reach out, right? Sink this and catch yourself. So
If you were working in the last stage, because I was working at a tank shop over in Hythe there,
Mhm.
and they build them standing up. So if you're in the last stage, you're pretty high up there, working up top there.
yep, that's true. Absolutely. Yet again, it would depend on what you're doing, right? Like, so it would depend on what you're doing. Yeah, if that's what you're doing at that place, then yeah, you could start getting pretty close to them by the time you get up to the top. So always good to know what's out there that can kill you. Obviously, that's what this safety section is about, right? Back safety. In 20 years ago, approximately 30% of all work-related injuries in Alberta requiring the employee to be off work for a day or more involved a back injury. In 2003, the annual report indicated new back injuries claims accounted for 25% of total claims. And in 2010, an annual report indicated new back injury claims accounted for 16%. So we're getting better. We are getting lots better. I think that means that the message is getting across. The message about lifting up and carrying things properly. So this is something that often is overlooked because we're in a hurry, we're rushing. We pick up very heavy things. A lot of times maybe we shouldn't. Like I said, there is no maximum amount. OH&S doesn't say you're only allowed to lift 75 pounds. You're only allowed to lift 100. There isn't an amount like that. So it's up to you to know if you can or can't lift it, or if you should be looking for a crane or a hoist or something else to lift it with. So what can your employer do? This is the type of thing where maybe they can make it so you don't have to lift whatever you're lifting. Change what it is you're lifting. Change where you're storing things. So maybe instead of storing the brake drums on the 5th floor, you can store them on the 1st floor. I don't know, if just an extreme example. Maybe using some equipment or reducing distance. You have to move this object away. If you only ever do brakes in bay 10, but you keep all of the brake parts on the opposite end of the shop, on the opposite end of the warehouse, maybe you should consider moving some of those things. Clearance and headroom in their working areas, so that's just engineering. If you have to lift the same thing all the time, maybe do something else, reduce the distance between you and the object being lifted, and always keep track of your injuries. So if you start getting sore, is the time to maybe say, hey, I should stop doing this before I really hurt myself. So what can you do to prevent a back injury? Use equipment. I can't stress this enough. Like, I'm going to say it a few times in this course. I'll talk about work smart, not hard. Okay. If there was a machine that would lift something up, that's what I'm going to go for immediately, rather than me doing it myself. Even such things as a wheel dolly. If I'm taking 2 brake drums from 2 bays over and I throw them on a wheel dolly, it's so much easier on your back, right? And sometimes it only takes that one wrong twinge and suddenly you have a back injury. Coordinate your lift when working with another worker. So maybe you can actually help each other lift something, right? Teamwork. Try to reduce the weight and size of the object. So if you don't lift 3 or 4 brake drums at once, maybe one at a time. Stretch or exercise muscles before attempting a heavy lift. Now this one's a bit contentious. Some sports doctors and stuff had looked into this stretching thing. We're gonna go ahead and say that stretching and exercise definitely help. But yet again, there's some contention in that one a bit. Lift gradually and smoothly. So don't just go jerking and pulling as hard as you can, as quick as you can, because if suddenly you realize that thing is too heavy for you to pick up, it's gonna hurt. And then again, report and treat your injuries. So this is overextension, okay? Don't try and pick it up there. Slide it over towards you. Go to the other side of the table if you can't slide it over to you. Safe lifting technique. I'm sure all of you have heard this a million times before. Use your leg muscles when lifting to avoid back strain. That is always, always, always what you're told to do. Lift with your legs, not with your back. Never pivot straight over at your hips. Okay, that is a way to hurt yourself very easily. What they're showing this lady here is doing is twisting around. Okay, so you don't want to do that. You want to always stay completely square to your load. So that means your load is in front of you and your feet are pointed in front of you. So you're completely squared up to the load. How should you put something down? Bend at the knees. Notice how she's not just pivoting straight forward over. So I feel almost bad. I used to, in class, give a demonstration. So I'll show you how to not pick up. Like this. Don't bend over just like this. See? Don't just bend straight over and pick something up. You have to bend with your knees. Okay? Oh man, this is probably the silliest I feel doing anything so far today. So bend over, not like this. Don't pick up with your back. If you need to pick something up, bend with your knees, just like that. All right. Oh no, and Clint saw me do that, didn't he? Crap. I didn't notice you sneak back into the room. All right. So always, always for up and down, bend at your knees. Very important. Rigging hardware and the safety factor associated with each item. So a few important things about rigging the hardware. When you're hooking up a load, you want to make sure that it is rated for the proper weights. That is probably the most important thing. Does anybody have a nice rack that looks like this at their workplace? Of all the chains and slings and all that good stuff?
They're all just hung over on the wall at our shop.
Are you able to, you're able to pretty neat though? Nice.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah, ours in a drawer.
In a drawer.
Under rig up shed.
You want to keep these stored neatly and nicely because if they touch any damage and worn, you have to get rid of them. And you don't want the equipment you're relying on to lift heavy loads to be damaged. That is not how you want them to be stored. So just like your same thing as your climbing harness. If you start having these thrown on the ground or just on a workbench all over the place, they start getting abrasive damage on them. The wire slings start getting kinks in them. Your chains start getting dented or stretched or damaged. They're all going to have to be replaced. Is anyone using wire rope slings still?
Not in the shop.
About the only thing we use them for is to hold down the tarps
Hold down tarps. Yep.
on the trailers.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah. They're not as, they still make them. So they still manufacture slings just like this one for lifting purposes. In our industry, I've seen them, we've gone away from this for a few reasons. They're susceptible to damage. They're easily shock loaded. So if they accidentally become shock loaded, they will bird cage out and they'll never return back to their proper formation, and then they're garbage. They're also easily kinked and damaged. So up here, if I looked close, you might even be able to see one that is that way, but if it gets a kink in here, it's garbage as well. Can't be used anymore. The thimble ends, so a wire rope with an eye that has a thimble like this, these get damaged and worn easily. They can become crushed. A lot of times we've gone away from those and gone to fabric slings is what we've essentially gone to. So a sling, just like this one, can be used here in these situations. This looks like it's, I guess this is a wire rope. It must be. Yeah, in this picture, it is a wire rope. And you would want to put some sort of load softeners and padding, even if you're using a fiber sling as well. These sharp edges around here and these sharp corners, especially on this wire rope, this can cause where you'll get the kink in the wire sling. So wire rope, the one place where it always will be used is right here in elevators. So in a public elevator, they still use wire cables to haul them up. It's a 20-to-1 factor. So a safety factor of 20-to-1 means that this elevator is designed to carry, I'm just going to use an easy number, 100 pounds, okay? So now instead, my elevator is only ever going to carry 100 pounds, but I need a steel cable for it, and it has to have a safety factor of 20-to-1. So that means the breaking point of my wire cable has to be 2,000 pounds if I intend to lift a load of 100 pounds, okay? That's how the 20-to-1 safety factor means. So for general rigging, if I wanted to lift something that weighed 100 pounds, does anyone want to guess how much the breaking limit on my safety factor would be?
1,000.
500.
500. Yeah, it would be 500. So 100 pounds times 5, 500 pounds. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. That's how the safety factor would work. Essentially, it's multiplied by it.
For some reason, I thought you pointed at the middle one there.
Oh, yeah, my mistake. All good. 5-to-1 is what I was talking about. As long as you know now, that is, it's multiplied by what it is, and that's what that ratio means. I'd be willing to bet that this is what the large majority of you are using in your shop.
Mm-hmm.
Different types of synthetic fiber web slings. So they're versatile. They come in all different types of configurations, make it easy for rigging up, okay? Different types, all these different kinds. They're not as susceptible to shock loading. They don't kink. So if I bent this in half and drove over it with a truck, it would still be fine as long as it wasn't torn or ripped. They can be used in any sort of configuration as long as it's on the label. So we'll talk about these 3 different configurations a little bit too. This label has to be on your synthetic sling. That is how you can tell what the weight rating is essentially. Without this, you have no idea what this is rated for. And the same thing goes for your wire sling, wire rope sling. It has to have a weight rating as well. And same thing with a chain. So a proper chain for lifting has to have a tag on it that says who manufactured this sling and how much weight it can hold in its different configurations. It's going, all of these will be based on manufacturers. So the actual manufacturers of these have to post them out there. So that being said, is it okay to grab any old chain and use it for lifting a load on a crane?
Definitely not.
It is definitely not. Absolutely not. And OH&S will be very, very upsetty with you if you decided to do that. Chain slings have to be specifically purchased for lifting. Okay.
I work for JDA, so it's an oil field hauling company. So we run 45-ton cranes, and then we have a 150-ton crane that we just bought, and the 250-ton crane. But we get almost all of we used to get all our chains every single year. We got them pull tested every year, and then we just found out we don't have to do that anymore. It's a visual inspection now.
Mm-hmm.
So but it didn't ever hurt to do the pull test all the time. But.
It doesn't ever hurt to do a little more than you have to, right? So we'll actually talk about inspecting that a little bit. So this is the type of damage you're going to look for in your wire rope or your wire sling. If you grab a wire sling to use it and you stab yourself, look and see how many of these wires are damaged, okay? If it's poking you in the hand, and I'm sure if any of you have ever played with a winch and rewound a winch cable or anything like that, you've been poked with cable before, and you know. So take a look, and you need to see how much damage there is inside of it. Chain slings as well need to be inspected. So here's what he's talking about, his visual inspection. You measure a brand new chain, and then you measure an old one, and you compare the lengths. There's going to be, from the manufacturer, they're going to be the one who give you wear and damage specifications, okay? The manufacturer, the reason they put their tag on here is because they're on the hook for that. If you follow their instructions, you should be okay. So they guarantee that as long as you're following all the instructions they put out, which include the wear and damage specifications, you'll be okay. So it's up to the manufacturer to designate those for each of their components. So for instance, this chain would have that tag with the manufacturer and a part number on it. You'd be able to look it up. This chain, brand new, should be this long. Each link is going to be able to have this amount of damage to it, this amount of wear, so on and so forth. So some of the things easily you can see with your visual inspection: kinked or gouged links of chunks coming out of them, bent, twisted links, stretched links, or where you have these little fins coming off, fingernailing. So this is where the chain was put together and it's starting to peel apart. And then on the hooks, you're gonna have to check, and this goes for cranes too. If any of you doing a crane inspection, chances are you've inspected these hooks before. So you're checking for cracks and wear. There's gonna be, they're actually from the manufacturer's a specification for this gap here, twisting, cracks, and any out of round deformation or wear inside of this bore here. So we're about halfway through everything. Anybody have any questions about anything? Climbing equipment, lifting up loads, or some of the basic rigging equipment?
What if the tags fall off or break off or whatever?
Yeah.
Use it.
Yeah, it's supposed to, unless it can be certified again, and those tags, as far as I know, you shouldn't be reattaching them. If it comes off, it's garbage. A lot of those chain hoists, or the chain slings, sorry, can be sent away to the manufacturer and they'll fix them. So when we were buying them in Edmonton, there was a company that made them. I can't remember what their name was. But if you would inspect it and say, oh, well, it's out of spec, you'd send it back to them and they'd refurbish it. So I don't know how they did it. That was their thing. So, and it would come back with a shiny new tag on it and everything would be ready to go. And then you could be assured that it was safe.
I've seen people get away with like load slings that you tie down loads with, but I mean, like you still really shouldn't use them. Or if an inspector saw them, they remembered to check, you're pretty much screwed.
I mean, yeah, like being realistic, I could use my shoelace to lift up a load. If the shoelace didn't break and the load went where I wanted it to, I mean, yeah, it worked. Was it the safest? Absolutely not. Is it best practice? No. And you're absolutely right there. If somebody saw you doing it, you probably would have to be held to account for that. And worst case scenario, if you killed or injured somebody because of it, you could be held personally responsible. So very cautious when you're picking out what you're going to be using for moving things.
Yeah, there's very little wiggle room to argue about this stuff. Like it's either you got the tag or you don't. You're using it or you're not. It's not.
That's pretty much it when it comes to safety. And I'll talk about a lot of this too, more in our course. Subjectivity and objectivity, especially when we get into CVIPs. Or any of you at a shop that does CVIPs is your bread and butter?
Yep.
Yeah. So what we used to have is a lot of subjectivity. So I feel that this brake shoe fails. Well, why? Well, it's separating. Well, how much is it separating? Well, it's enough that I think it's separated. That is subjective. So I might say it's separating. Clint might say it's okay. The ones that I've seen them way more separated than that, and they're still fine. So that's subjective. Now, since 2016, they published a new CVIP manual. Now they've made it a lot more objective. So for instance, brake shoes being separated, the lining separating from the shoe, now you have to have a certain thickness separated into a certain depth. And that is how it fails. And that is objective. That means it doesn't matter how Clint feels about it. Did that feeler gauge go in far enough? Yeah, then it failed. Right? Or it didn't, well, then it passed. There is no, I feel it did, I think it might be okay. Okay, it's very objective. And that's a lot like that with safety, or that's how they're trying to make it, right? The tag isn't there. Well, I have no idea how much this can lift. Garbage, it's done. I'm not going to use it to lift then, right? Tag is there. I've inspected it. It's ready to go. It's safe. I can trust that according to my best practices, it's going to be acceptable for lifting the load, right? So you're absolutely right. I mean, it's black or white in some of the cases with this. Okay, so what we're going to do, we have 2 more objectives left. I'm not going to go through them anymore. Thanks to all of you for sitting through this first day of this. I think it went pretty well. I think it's a lot to get used to.